Hi, this is your teacher, Paul. It's December 29th, 2020, and I'm going to start with the topic, what are you afraid of? So as people join us here, then I think we could talk about things that you're afraid of or things that you fear, something that scares you. Those three words, fear, afraid, and scare, are all used differently, depending on the thing that scares you or you are afraid of or you fear. So, so that'll be the topic. It's 12:56 here in Minnesota, and just expecting a snowstorm here soon. We're going to get about 4 or 5 inches, which is typical at this time of year in December, late December. And then, of course, it gets really cold in January. And looks like people are joining us here. I assume that the people who are joining here now were on YouTube and watching videos, perhaps videos that I've made. It's interesting to see what people are attracted to in terms of the video content, what area is of most need for students. What do you need to improve on? A lot of the verbs that I cover are simple, really simple, easy, or not easy verbs, but they're commonly used verbs. Most Americans think of the irregular verbs as being the easy verbs, but I know that those are not the easy verbs because of the way that they're conjugated. Oh, you received the notification. Okay. So I guess you were just on YouTube and the notification popped up. So the topic is fear, or what scares you? What are you afraid of? And then after that preposition, you can use a noun or a gerund. So you can say, I'm afraid of heights, Heights. I have a fear of heights. I'm afraid of heights. Or you could say heights scare me, which I don't think sounds as good as I'm afraid of heights. Or you can say, I'm afraid of falling from a high place. In that case, you have a gerund. I'm afraid of falling. Or I'm afraid of losing my balance when in a high location. Yes, you can use worry too. Worry is less of a is a lesser degree compared to fear. I worry about, and then whatever the thing is, things that worry you. If you're worried about something, it's often like a daily activity or something that's fairly routine. I worry about um, running out of gas. I worry about my health. I worry about my kids. Yes, you could say I'm afraid of water. That's good for people who get nervous around water because they fear drowning. I'm afraid of drowning. I'm afraid of water. If at this time of year, if you live around a lake in this area in Minnesota, the lakes freeze over. And so people are afraid of falling through the ice, which is a real fear. If you go out on the water, or rather the ice, which a lot of people do because, once that ice freezes, then you can walk on top of the lake. And then, there are a lot of things that you can do when you're on top of the lake once it's frozen. You can ski, you can skate. If the snow is cleared away, people like ice fishing. They like to go snowmobiling. And then if they engage in those kinds of activities, then there is a possibility that they'll fall through the thin areas where there's ice on the lake. So, I definitely have a fear of falling through the ice. I'll wait until the middle of January after there's been a couple months of cold weather, and I know that the lake has frozen over completely, and then I'll go out on the lake because it's fun to walk out on the lake. Iman says, I'm afraid of COVID-19. You have to say I am afraid of. I'm afraid of getting COVID. You can say that too. Afraid of getting the virus. Dread. Yeah, you can use dread. I dread getting sick. So after dread, you can use the dread. I dread getting sick. I dread becoming sick. I'm afraid of getting sick. Nowadays, if anybody gets sick, then they immediately think that it might be COVID. So if you have a bad cough or a headache, they can include fatigue and muscle ache. Those are all symptoms of COVID. So yeah, a lot of people are afraid of getting sick. Now that the vaccine is coming out, there should be fewer people getting sick. At least the people who are most susceptible to sickness may be protected by the vaccine, which is good. As a teacher, I'll probably get my vaccine a little bit earlier because we want to have people returning to the schools as soon as possible. So I'm hoping I can get that vaccine. I'm also older. I'm not that old. I'm 57, so I shouldn't have too much concern. I know that people in their 70s, 80s, 90s, they're the ones who get really sick. But a severe reaction to COVID, I suppose, can happen to anyone. There have been people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, etc., who are getting really sick. So, yeah, so that's one thing a lot of people would say. I'm afraid of getting sick. Okay, so get some ideas of people's fears. I'm afraid of Bolsonaro. Yeah, I suppose if you live in Brazil, you should be afraid of him and what he's capable of. He's kind of like Trump. I think one reason why Trump lost is a lot of people are afraid of what he might do. And I think in Brazil, people are afraid of what Bolsonaro might do. Egle says that she's afraid that 2021 will be worse than 2020, and that could happen. We all knew early in 2020 that virus was coming around. Nobody realized how bad it was going to be. But now that we know how bad it can be, perhaps we'll be a little bit better prepared if there's another pandemic. But the experts say there's nothing that would prevent a simultaneous outbreak of two viruses or two forms of illness that could happen. We have two pandemics at the same time. There's also a number of naturally occurring things that could cause problems for people in 2021. Wildfires in the United States were bad. Here in California, and in Australia, I know they had bad wildfires, and that caused a lot of destruction. Some people are afraid of the COVID vaccine, and the experts are saying that you don't have anything to fear, but there certainly could be a small percentage of people who have a negative reaction. If they have allergies, then they could have a negative reaction to the vaccine. But I think most people will welcome the opportunity to get it and feel somewhat protected. I think it's a good bet that this is going to work, but it's going to take a long time to vaccinate everyone. So, they say that we have to vaccinate everybody in the world. That might not happen for a few years. Liban is asking about dogs, how to talk about being afraid of dogs. So yeah, you'd say, I'm afraid of dogs. You could say I fear dogs, but it's better to say I'm afraid of dogs. That's pretty common. Or you can say I'm afraid of big dogs. There's really no reason to fear a small but big dog. Or you say I'm afraid of getting bitten by a dog. So yeah, dogs can. Oh, my connection's unstable. So whatever I'm saying now is not being transmitted. So they're still trying to reconnect. Okay, then I think it's reconnected now. So yeah, and having a fear of dogs is a legitimate concern because some dogs aren't well trained, or they are trained to bite people. So there are about 35 people here. It's 109. Usually at the end of the year, I don't get a lot of traffic to the website or to the videos. So last time I was here, had about 80 people on. And I don't really care how many there are. Just interesting to see how many people actually show up. Because all I do is I turn on the computer and hit the button that takes me live on YouTube. So interesting the way that works. I'm not working today. I have the next few days off, and then I'll go back to work on Monday when the school year resumes. And I'm looking forward to that already. I get kind of bored if I don't have a routine, and school helps provide that routine. Although I can find enough things to do around the house, that usually involves fixing things that have broken, or um, taking care of any little thing around the house that has to be tended to or cleaned up or whatever. So the topic is, what are you afraid of? What scares you? What are you afraid of? What do you fear? Or you can say, I have a fear of. I have a fear of heights. I have a fear of small spaces. In that case, that would be claustrophobia. I have claustrophobia, and then you don't have to use the word fear, because the the suffix in that word phobia means fear. So, and we use the word phobia as a noun. Do you have any phobias? You can say that too. What sort of phobias do you have? And then a person would say, I have claustrophobia. Amin is asking how to learn phrasal verbs. And I think you just, if you can identify some that you've heard recently and write them down in a notebook and practice them, and listen for them in conversation, look for them when you're reading. You should be able to recognize phrasal verbs or verb phrases. They're all different kinds. You can also refer to those as idioms. If you go to the website, learnamericanenglishonline.com, then there are sections of the website that provide examples and some instruction for verb phrases or idioms. If you click on the idioms section, then you can find a lot of examples of that. Delaware says, I'm afraid of speaking English. Oh, that's a legitimate fear too. A lot of my students are afraid of speaking English. And first language, but kids can learn language very quickly. Oh, my connection's bad. Okay, I don't know how much you can hear right now. It says they're trying to reconnect. Okay, so reconnected. But you notice that children learn things very quickly because they don't have those fears. So if you can put that fear aside of whatever it is you're trying to learn how to do, especially if it's English, just don't worry about it too much. If you have too big a fear of making a mistake, then you might not talk at all. You might not try to communicate at all. And the only way that you're going to be able to learn how to communicate in English is by speaking and writing. Those are very important skills. Those productive skills are important. Speaking and writing. Listening and reading are important too. You can listen all day long, and that might help. And reading there's more activity, more brain activity involved in reading. And of course, is very helpful. But speaking and writing are, I think, the keys to your success. If you really want to learn English, and you should have a notebook, just any old notebook will do, and write in it regularly every day. And don't stop. Don't quit. Try to dedicate at least an hour every day to learning English. And a significant part of that should be writing and speaking, whatever you can do to speak. It's not always easy to find people to speak with online, Of course, nowadays with Google Meet and Zoom, it's easier. Orion is asking if I speak another language. I don't really. I practice German, and so I read in German, and I listen to it on YouTube, and I have some audio tapes, and I've been doing that my entire life. So I can understand it, but when it comes to speaking, just like you, it's hard, and I make a lot of mistakes. But you have to try, and don't worry too much if you make mistakes. If you make a mistake, that's fine. Just move on. Speaking differs from writing because when you speak, you don't have as much time to think before putting the words out there. When you're writing, at least you have a little bit. If you're writing by hand, at least you have a little bit of time to think about the next word. But when you're speaking, it's more difficult, and that's why people have trouble. They just don't have the words. And I think in order to improve your speaking, one thing you can do is you can commit to memory certain phrases or sentences, or questions. And that'll make it easier for you when it comes time to say something, depending on the situation. So what is it that you would have to say at the store for grocery shopping, for example? Or if you're talking to your supervisor or you're talking to a friend, if it's a social situation, what are the kinds of things that you'd want to say? And just commit that to memory. And if you read something in the newspaper or in a magazine that's really interesting, write that sentence down. Or if it's a famous philosopher whose work you like, if it's Henry David Thoreau or Ralph Waldo Emerson, for example, two well-known American philosophers, it could be Shakespeare, not that people speak like that anymore, but I think it's worth looking a little bit at Shakespeare and some of the famous quotations, and definitely the sonnets. If you have a chance, look up some of the sonnets written by Shakespeare. Again, you might not use that kind of vocabulary that you hear in a Shakespearean sonnet, but it might be worth your time to look that up and practice reading it. In some of the classes that I teach, because I do teach a communication and speech class, my students will read famous speeches. For example, the Gettysburg Address by Abraham Lincoln, and I Have a Dream by Martin Luther King Jr. So if you look those speeches up and you commit to memory some of those lines that are in those speeches, that could be helpful. Again, you might not ever use those memorized lines from speeches, but you never know when that knowledge might be handy or useful. And if you do commit something to memory, then you would become better acquainted with the vocabulary in those speeches or poems or plays. So someone's asking me about films and books that help in improving English. I can't think of any one off the top of my head. I can think of movies that I like. Oh, although I should say, if you watch films from the 1930s and 1940s, although sometimes the English is kind of fast, that might be helpful. And if you watch the classic films, like, Casablanca, that's a good one. Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman. Ingrid Bergman spoke English as a second language. She was originally from Sweden, I think, and then she became a famous American actress. I'm pretty sure she changed her citizenship, I think. But yeah, watch some of those old films from the 1930s and 1940s, or you can get film clips on YouTube, and then find the closed captioning. You just have to click on that CC button on YouTube, and then the words will appear. The translation might not be totally accurate, but it would be somewhat helpful, I think. But if you do that all the time, I think that can be very helpful. I assume that most of you do go to YouTube on a regular basis because you're here, and that's good. I think that can be very, very helpful, especially if you do it on a regular basis. And the technology available through the internet just gets better and better. And I assume 5 years from now, what this looks like will change. Where I'm sitting here and looking at the camera and reading through the scroll. I assume there might be some ways that people will be able to pop up on the screen, and then I could engage with those people directly. That would be interesting. I'm sure that technology exists right now, but I haven't looked into it that much. There are different ways of engaging with an audience. So right now, I'm trying to figure out how to use YouTube. And even though I've been on YouTube for a long time, it's mostly in just making videos. So I have a whiteboard here, and this is where I make the videos. And sometimes I go into my backyard just for a different location. I've been doing that a lot lately. Or I've gone to a number of different locations to make videos in cities that I visited. Al Beck is asking if I can imitate a Southern accent. Not well. I couldn't do it well. Okay, one thing about living in the South is people who live in the South some of them speak very slow because they understand all the words they're using. So I don't know if you caught that. My connection was bad. I just did a bad Southern accent. So I shouldn't make fun of my Southern neighbors. I live in the North. I live in Minnesota. So the English here is quite different from the South. And I grew up around Chicago. So I have a Chicago accent. And it's basically a Midwestern accent. The English I speak is the English mainly that you hear on television. So when someone wants to get into a TV reporter job, or they want to read the news on the radio, then the accent that they try to imitate, if it's wildly different, is that Midwestern accent. So the English spoken in Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, that's Midwestern. And then as you go farther south, then it changes. And I'm not saying it's not bad, but it's not the standard. If you ever visit New York, that can be a really difficult accent to understand, because people who live in New York speak English so quickly. My brother's brother-in-law grew up on Long Island, that's in New York, and he speaks English very quickly, and he's got a Long Island accent, and it's really hard to understand what he's saying. So, and then let's say people live in Boston, which is north of New York. Sometimes their English is difficult to understand. And but really, anywhere you go in the United States, you shouldn't have too much trouble. But I mean, it's good to know the differences, I think, in the different accents. And then, of course, there are the accents that people speak with when they come here from other countries, and that sounds very American to me when you hear a person speaking with a Spanish accent or a Chinese accent or a Russian accent or a French accent. That sounds like an American thing because you meet so many people from different countries. And I've always heard English spoken as a second language. So that's, you'll hear all different kinds of accents. An LA accent, California accent. I wouldn't even try to imitate that, but it definitely has a different sound. And I'm not going to try to imitate it, but it does sound different. No, I'm not going to try. I'm not going to do it. So I was asking people to tell me what they're afraid of or what they fear or what scares them. Hugo says, or it might be Ugo, says, I'm afraid of a meaningless life. Well, that's interesting. Or you could say, I'm afraid of leading a meaningless life, or I'm afraid of living a meaningless life. People are asking about books also for English. And I got this question last time I was on. I think the book that I used to use a lot when I started teaching was a book by Robert Dixon. And I forget the title of it now. I think it's Dixson. And just a number of different exercises. But I thought that was really useful for my students. Her books were pretty useful. Fundamentals of English, which you can probably find on eBay used. And then the side-by-side books. There's a whole series entitled Side by Side. And I think the author is Robert Molinsky, Molinsky. I think that's it. And I used his books with my students. I'm always looking for new books, especially for vocabulary development, and of course grammar and usage. But the ones I think that are most useful take the form of a dialogue. So you've got A and B. You've got two people speaking. The first person is represented by A. The second person is represented by the letter B. And then you can see how a person asks a question and how a person responds to a question. I think that's really useful. I'm going to stop here pretty soon. Usually when I've come on, it's only been for about half an hour. It's about 35 minutes. There are 90 people here. That's great. Edson's asking about the difference between afraid and fear. So yeah, so there are some differences I mentioned earlier. I'm afraid of, then you want to have that preposition. And then you can use the noun, or you can use a gerund, So I'm afraid of getting sick. Getting would be the gerund. Or I'm afraid of COVID, and that would be the noun. That would be the disease. Or say I'm afraid of cancer, or I'm afraid of getting cancer. Fear, you'll hear people say, I fear, and then the thing. Sometimes it has a more formal feeling to say I fear and then whatever it is. Or you can say I have a fear of. So then you're using fear as a noun. I have a fear of, and then whatever it is. I have a fear of death. I have a fear of dogs. I have a fear of losing my job, maybe. Afraid of my mother-in-law. I'm afraid of my mother-in-law. That's a good one. I'm afraid of upsetting my mother-in-law. I'm afraid of making my mother-in-law mad at me. I have a fear of my mother-in-law. I think a lot of people would just say, I'm afraid of my mother-in-law. That's good. Some of these I don't quite understand, but if it's school, success in school, I'm afraid of wasting my time in school. You can say something like that. Or I'm afraid my time in school has been wasted. I'm afraid of getting bad grades. You can say that. I worry about getting bad grades. If you want to use worry about. Elena saying that says, I'm afraid there will be many deaths in India. I think that's because of COVID. Yeah, I don't know what's going on in some in countries outside of the United States anymore. I used to pay more attention to that, and I pay attention to that. Here in Minnesota, it's been about, I think we're averaging about 70 people per day. And I've noticed that in countries like India and in some African countries, the numbers aren't as high as they thought they would be. That might be because the population, the average age is less. I'm just guessing. In more industrialized countries where people live longer, I think perhaps there's a greater chance that a segment of the population will be affected by COVID because you have so many elderly people. And certainly there are elderly people in other parts of the world, but in some countries, you don't have a chance to live into your 80s and 90s. And I think the vast majority of people who are dying are in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. And that's why the death toll has been so high. And then for people who have some sort of underlying conditions, they're also dying. I think people who have diabetes, people who have respiratory problems, breathing problems, pre-existing problems, they're more susceptible to dying. Clara says, I'm afraid of you. Why would you be afraid of me? I have had students say that they're afraid of me, or I've heard that they were afraid of me. And I kind of know why. In some teaching positions, I just don't smile. And I'm not your friend, because that's not the job of the teacher to be your friend. And so sometimes I come off as being very serious, which is good, because I think when you're a teacher, you got to do your job and focus on the job and not making friendships. you know. And then I think there's something about my demeanor that causes some students to feel maybe a little bit of fear. I don't know. I did have it when I taught in high school. Some of the kids were afraid of me, and I yelled at the kids sometimes. So I guess they had a reason to be afraid. But now that I work with adults, that has changed. I don't yell at adults, but I'm pretty serious in what I do and just focus on the job. So, I'm gonna stop. I think it's 41 minutes. I usually don't go this long. But I got to get stuff done. Here comes the snow. So, 95 people here. Wow, that's great. Interesting. So, I'll try to come back on maybe tomorrow. If I think I'll have time. Tomorrow's Wednesday. I don't know what the best time is. Eventually, I'll probably settle on one time, I think, and then just come on at that time, probably for just half an hour. It takes a little while to kind of get up to speed. However, when I'm doing this, it does take some practice. But I think once I have a routine, and then you're used to seeing me at a particular time, then that might be a good way to go about this, so then when I'll be on approximately. Morning or afternoon, most likely the morning, I think. I'm still deciding. I experimented with 9 o'clock a couple weeks ago. Some of you remember I was on at about 9. And but I wake up early, so it could be any time. It could be 6 o'clock in the morning, and I don't know what that would be your time. It could be anything. It could be the evening. It could be noon. But I regularly wake up to sleep. So trying to reconnect. Now it's reconnected. All right. So I'm going to go. Have a good day, everybody. And glad to see you here. Thanks for showing up. And I'll see you either tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. But I'll come on one more day, I think, before the new year begins. I'm always learning something from this experience. So thanks for participating. Okay. Have a good day, everybody. Bye-bye.